evening, everyone. Please be seated. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification Training course. Hope everyone's had a wonderful week as we prepare to, I don't want to say wind down, we're preparing to ramp up and get into this next week here. Got at least a cool down coming. I think we're all pretty thankful for that, being in Texas with over 90 days over 100 degrees. Over 90 days. Whew. You know, I remember looking at the USA Today when I was a lot younger, living back up in Ohio, and that's when we still actually used newspapers quite a bit. And they had on the back of the one page, I think it was the front page, the weather forecast and the temperatures throughout the United States. I remember in the wintertime looking at different places in the South and saying, man, I would that I was down there. It's 85 degrees right now in the middle of January, you know, or I would that I was over here, you know, because it was nice and warm and sunny, because it was always cold and gloomy in the wintertime, the winter months up in Ohio. Now it's like, I would that I was someplace that was a little bit cooler right now, you know. So, you know, your priorities change depending on circumstances in your environment. But in all honesty, I'm glad to be here. Peaceful Solution headquarters, some of the greatest people on the face of the earth to work with and work around. So I hope everyone has their books that you brought with you. Those of you who are following us online, of course, welcome to the Peaceful Solution Teacher Certification Training class, and of course you can download the Respect unit. That is pretty much the first unit that is right there. You can download that and you can follow along with us, because we're going to be picking up on page 175. That's where 176, excuse me. That's where William left off last class. Excuse me. And some of that stuff we're going to be talking about today in our air. We're going to be picking up on 176 where he left off, and we're going to be continuing on with this concept of the principle of respect. All right. Now, this is dealing with the environment. And as we learned at the very beginning of the program when we were going through the character unit, our environment is made up of more than just the air we breathe, the water we drink, the foods we eat, and so forth. Our environment is made up of everything around us, including the people that we live with and encounter on a daily basis. The places we go to work, the places we go to school, the places we eat at, right? All of these things make up our environment. And yes, these other elements are there. The plants and the trees and the water, those are all a part of the environment, but we're focusing today on those particular aspects of it, and looking at how, of course, the choices that mankind has made as a society, are making, and will make in the future have a direct impact on the environment. Now, if you remember what William said last class, you know, some people have the mentality of, you know, well, I won't see it in my lifetime. You know, I won't see it in my generation. By the time this stuff takes place, or these barrels that we buried of radioactive waste, you know, in these lakes or at the bottom of the ocean, by the time those things rust out, I'll be long gone, right? And more than likely, they probably will be long gone. But, you know, the problem with that mentality is you're not having care and concern for future generations. What about your children? What about your great-grandchildren and so forth? If you looked at the news lately, you've seen back in 2011, of course, this was, you know, about 12 years ago now. It doesn't seem like time really seems like it flies, but 2011, when that big earthquake hit off the coast of Japan, and it created a tsunami that, you know, of course, struck Japan, and it impacted and affected the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And they've been battling for, you know, the last 12 years to keep that whole facility under control, because there was some damage to, you know, parts of the facility. I'm not sure if it's the reactor or something, but you know, they use water and so forth to cool those cores. And they've gotten to the point now where they've stored up so much of this radioactive wastewater that the only thing that they've determined, and they've hashed this out for a long period of time, is that they're going to have to strip out as much of the radioactive contaminants in the water as possible. I think there's one element that they weren't able to get out, and then just dump it into the ocean. Now that last element, they're saying it gets diluted with the salt water, so it's not going to really pose a big threat. But there's other countries, like China's one of them, that have banned all imports of seafood coming from Japan, right? So what is that going to do? That's going to start to impact the livelihoods of people who depend on fishing, to generate an income for their families. And it's not just their families. If they're a big employer, they might employ 10 or 12 or 20 or 100 men, but it's not just those 100 men, it's them and their families. So you could be looking at, 400 or 500 people, possibly even more than that, who are going to be affected by this, as a result of a contaminant going into the ocean. And of course, not always are these consequences readily seen immediately. Sometimes you do see a little bit of short-term problems, but sometimes you see them come way down the road in the form of long-term problems that arise. So we're going to be continuing here on page 176. Let's just go back and refresh our memories from what that lesson plan page 7, lesson plan 7, page D, and look at the procedure that William, he covered this and he read it, but we'll go back and read it to start off the class, and then we'll get into procedure 5 as well. And if you look at procedure number 4, it says activity. Tell students to turn to Earth's resources, found on page 176 in their handbooks. Divide students into 6 groups. Now this is of course what you would do as a teacher if you had a class. These are great opportunities to give your students a little bit of time to, to stretch out and get up and move around and get in the groups. Depending on how many people you have, hopefully you have at least 12 students in your class so you can get 6 groups. But if you have to make smaller groups, then you can and make it work out. So it says assign 1 resource per group and allow time for students to brainstorm the benefits of the resource they have been assigned. Choose 1 spokesperson from each group to report the benefits. And of course, William kind of got a little bit started on this last class, this past Wednesday. Let's turn back there real quick, forward to 176, and we'll go over a few of these resources. While you're doing that, just to remind you on our next slide there, the definition of this word resource is a stock or supply of materials, staff or other assets that can be drawn on by a person or organization in order to function effectively. All right, and it can be drawn on by a person or organization in order to function effectively. So it's something that actually that has a benefit to the person or organization as well. And then the definition in the back of your book here, I think it's on page 214, it is a supply of something to take care of a need. A supply of something to take care of a need. All right. So if we go back to our book here and look at the very top of the page, it says Earth's resources. Our planet provides us with many other valuable resources. The 6.5 billion, or as we were reminded last class, we have a little over 8 billion people on the face of the earth right now who inhabit and share the earth, need these resources for their survival, health, and physical well-being. And, one of the things that we see, and William touched on it a little bit in the previous class, sometimes you'll have countries or groups of people from various countries or even a collection of countries, that'll go into a place and they'll exploit the people or the resources and the people in that particular area. And like some of the pictures that was shown regarding the diamonds in certain of the countries in Africa, those people are there doing all the hard work, doing all the labor. It's their land, their country, and, they're not truly benefiting, reaping the rewards of the mining of the diamonds or the mining of the other minerals and so forth. One of the countries had was it Myanmar that had the rubies, the great supply of rubies. But in a lot of cases, you see that, and it's like the people who are there in those areas, they should be benefiting just as well, just as much as the companies that are profiting from those resources. But you see this, and you see this particular type of situation when respect is not shown, when true care and concern is not shown. As a company, if a company was trained and their directors or owners or whatever you want to call them, were trained in the peaceful solution, when they say, wanted to mine a particular item, a ruby, a stone, an element. William mentioned some of the things, the precious metals that are used, even in like the the F-35 fighter. Half a ton of that is used in each plane. You would think that they would, in realizing where these elements are, this is someone else's land, this is someone else's territory, this is someone else's country. And like William said, when there's something that you want, what do? Ask, right? Then you've got to accept the answer as well. But, work something out with the country and say, we could really use this element. Is there anything that we have as a resource that you can use? This has been done for thousands of years. Bartering has been done for thousands of years between countries, because not everything is grown, or mined or harvested in one particular area. Certain areas are great for wheat. Certain areas are great for, fruits, orchards and things like that. Certain areas are better for growing rice. Rice don't grow on trees. I don't know if you've ever seen a rice field or a rice paddy. The first time I believe that I saw one was when we were heading to D.C. for one of our trips. And I don't remember if it was Arkansas or someplace, but it was interesting because I'd never really seen a rice field. Rice needs that heavy amount of water to grow, and they flood those fields for the rice. So certain environments are better for that. You're not going to be growing, oranges and, and pineapples and mangoes in West Texas, right? You do well to be a cactus farmer in West Texas, because not too much grows out that way. But these are our resources, right? And everybody on the face of the earth benefits from these resources. So it goes without saying that it's everyone's responsibility on the face of the earth to see to it that they're maintained, that they're taken care of, that they're not polluted. And William covered some of the definitions of the word pollution and how it negatively affects and impacts everything that it touches. And we're going to talk about some of these resources here that we depend on still today. Mankind has depended on these resources for thousands of years and will for many, many years to come, forever. And if you look here, continuing on, it says, do you know how the earth's resources can benefit us? So this is what you would ask your students. Do you know how the earth's resources can benefit us? Use the spaces below to fill in the benefits of the resources listed. The first one has been completed for you. So that's why you have 6, right? People say, oh, there's 7 here, right? But the first one is given as an example for you, and then you would break down the other 6 for your students to go and do. And so the first one there was air. Answers will vary, but might include it contains oxygen. So air is a resource. So here's one of the benefits, or some of the benefits, which is needed to sustain life. It helps us to hear by carrying sound waves. And a lot of people don't even think about that. When people, they say, and I've never personally been in space before. I've spaced out before, but I've never been in space. I guess it's pretty similar because when you space out, you don't hear anything, right? But up in space, they say they can't hear you scream, okay? Well, I guess even if you were 35,000 feet up, nobody hear you scream either. But if you had 2 people in space, no one would hear you scream because there's no air to carry those sound waves, and there's no air to cause a vibration on your eardrum, right? And there's other things in your ear, but your eardrum, if you've ever seen an eardrum under a microscope, when sound is going in, that thing is is bouncing based on the frequency of the air that's impacting it. And the voice, my voice coming out of my mouth, everything that makes a sound, a chair sliding, a book slamming, a page turning, it gives off a frequency. And that frequency, that movement, you wouldn't think that it really affects much, but it does, travels through the air, it hits your eardrums, it hits all of our eardrums pretty much simultaneously, because sound does travel at a particular speed, but at 700 miles per hour, something like that, 740, 750, it's going to pretty much seem like it's simultaneously. It vibrates that eardrum sends a signal to your brain deciphers it, and you hear the sound, right? You hear the word, because the eardrum is a receptor, just like the eye is a receptor, just like the tongue or the taste bud is a receptor as well. So it helps us to hear by carrying sound waves, and air enables birds and planes to fly. Now, people who have, a disability in that area, sometimes it's not that the eardrum doesn't vibrate, but there's a break in the electrical connection to transport that frequency to the brain. And that's why some people are helped with external or partially internal hearing aids, because it just basically transmit that sound for them to the brain. I was able to get some of this. I got it from the natural grocery store here recently. I was able to find some gluten-free air. This is fresh Texas air too. It's even kosher. And if you look online for air, you're gonna have a hard time finding it. If you actually look at my next slide, this is the picture that I found, right? Slide number 3. There you go. That's air. You can't see air though, can you? You can't see air, but we know it's there. How? Because of what it does and how it affects us, right? We air, when the breeze blows, we can't see that breeze, but we feel the breeze. We feel the evaporation on our bodies. We see the leaves, the trees blowing in the wind. If it's blowing at us head on when we're driving, we struggle. We feel the wind, coming against us. We see planes flying and birds flying and insects flying and so forth, right? We hear people. We're able to take a deep breath, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where, have you ever fallen on your back and had the wind knocked out of you? Like impacted your back really hard, where it seems like it, the wind is knocked out of you. Now, I don't know exactly what takes place in that situation, if your body has to do a Control Alt Delete and reset because something's not right, but it's like you can't take a breath, when that takes place, and it takes a few seconds for your body to be able to, catch that breath. Or if you've ever been swimming and you've gotten some water in your nose and your mouth and you couldn't, catch a breath, people tend to spaz out. We see real quick how important that air is. You can take the toughest man or woman, I ain't afraid of anything, cut off their air, you'll see how big their eyes get, and they'll do everything they can to try to get some fresh air. They don't become so tough when something as little as a resource of air, which you can't see, is taken away. Okay, so it's very, very important to us. Internal combustion engines, right? They require fuel, a spark, and air, right, in order for them to work. And if you think about the advent of aviation and the naturally aspirated engines that were used in the design of aircraft, they operate pretty efficiently at a certain elevation. But if you know anything about mountains, now I've never lived in the mountains or anywhere like on the west coast of the United States, but the higher the elevation, the thinner the air. Okay, if you ever looked at your oven or read directions, on higher elevations, they tell you have to cook food a little bit warmer. Water boils at a little bit different temperature. I think it boils at a higher temperature the higher you go, because there's less atmospheric pressure and the air is thinner. So they come up with turbines, right, that are forced induction to force higher volumes of air into the combustion chamber, so the vehicle, in most cases, helicopters or planes that, well, not helicopters, but planes that fly at higher altitudes, can still function. Otherwise, they have to fly at a much lower altitude. But the thing about flying higher is that it's more efficient because the air is thinner, right? You're not dealing with all that crosswinds and so forth. Not as bad anyway. So that's a benefit of air. Now, if you look at the next slide while we read this here, fresh water. It says answers will vary but might include needed to sustain all life. And that's something that everything on the face of the earth needs. It needs fresh. Now, you notice the key word. It did not just say water. It said fresh water, indicating that it's fresh, it's clean, it doesn't have contaminants or pollutants in it that would cause harm or sickness to the body, okay? Even down to the smallest microorganism that we can't even see, that, yes, is in the air we breathe, it requires water. Even right now, you can't see it, but there's something that's called, I have to dig back in my days when I went to heating and cooling school. I think they call it a sling psychometer, and it's a device that is it's a thermometer, and it has what they call a wet bulb. You dip the little cloth in water, and then you spin it around, and depending on how much moisture is in the air, that'll tell you the temperature, and you compare that with the dry bulb temperature or the actual temperature. And then you use a formulation, and that'll give you the moisture content of the air. And it says, okay, well, it's the moisture content is 50% or 60% or whatever, and that general terms gives you your relative humidity. Okay, relative humidity is the amount of moisture that's in the air. Okay, and so there's a lot of interesting devices that are out there, and how the humidity affects how we breathe. Some people have a very difficult time breathing when it's very humid, and so they move to places like Arizona, because there's a lot less humidity in Arizona. Not very many lakes in Arizona, if any. And so a lot of people who have respiratory issues and so forth, they move to places where it's a little bit drier, because humid air it takes a lot more work to breathe that in, right? Because it actually is heavier than just drier air. But it says water is also needed to irrigate crops and make common items such as paper and electricity. All right, it's used in industries, it's used in cooking, right? We need water. If you just think of the basic concepts of what water is needed for, just in your everyday life. And sometimes you forget about these things. I'm reminded of it when the power goes out, and the power, we rely on the electricity to operate the pumps to draw the water out of the wells and pump it to our houses. And when the power goes out, and the power is out, you come in the house, you go to the sink, and you turn on the faucet to wash your hands, right? But nothing comes out, because it's a habit. We're so used to having these conveniences every day coming out of our faucet. Now, few thousand years, people weren't turning on faucets. They had a bucket somewhere, or somebody had to go and draw that water out of the well, and transport the kitchen. And that's how they transported and got their water, right? We were down in the Baja, southern Baja of Mexico a few months ago, and some of the places that we were out in, and the people that live in those areas, those colonies out there, they do not have running water. And there were a lot of people that lived out in those areas. They did not have running water. The city does not pump water out there, and they didn't have waste systems to carry their waste away. So now, thankfully, we didn't go out there and just see rivers of waste running down the sides of the streets. That would have been pretty gross. But in some cases, you do see that. And if we get to it, if we get the opportunity, might not be, I'm sure it won't be this class because I didn't cut the article, but there are some places in Asia where most of that raw sewage is dumped right into waterways that just a little bit down the way, people are down there bathing and drawing water out to go take home and to cook and to bathe at home, right? And this is, again, we won't get into it now, but this is, you see sicknesses and diseases coming as a result of the contamination. Not all contamination is coming from big factories, pumping out, hydrocarbons and things like that up into the atmosphere. Some of these things are right down here coming from mankind on Earth. But, the people there, they got their water trucked in. And they had reservoirs at their houses, and big trucks came and they pumped water into those reservoirs. The drinking water, for the most part, for what we saw, it was the big 5-gallon blue jugs that they had brought to their house. Now imagine having to depend on someone to do that, or you'd have to do it if you had a car, right? If you didn't have a car and you had to go do it yourself, imagine carrying 2 5-gallon jugs of those water buckets for 4 or 5 miles. Water weighs like 8.3 pounds per gallon. So you're looking at 80 pounds, over 80 pounds of water, between those 2 5-gallon jugs that you would have to carry 5 miles back with you. Okay? Imagine the difficulty that some people have to go through just to get the things that we have. And if we're not careful and take these things for granted, they could be taken away from us, but hopefully not. But we have to be thankful for what we have and see to it that the things that we do, the decisions that we make, don't contaminate the resources that we rely on, or anybody else's resources either. But it also goes into making items such as paper and electricity. Electricity from the hydroelectric dams, the hydroelectric turbines. I know Lake Mead was really low there for a while. I'm not sure what the current height of Lake Mead is right now, but they were really concerned because they had dropped, I think it was like 175 feet or something like that in water loss because of the extreme drought that was taking place. And they rely on that water flowing through that lake to power the dams, the turbines, to generate electricity that, sends out power to hundreds of thousands or possibly millions of people, right? So this is another resource that, we have to be mindful of, that we don't pollute. And not only that resource, but other things we can do to pollute the water, other activities we can do to reduce the water by polluting even the air, where you don't get the rain that you need it, you don't get it where you need it, or you don't get it in the quantity that you need it, right? Because contrary to popular belief, these aren't just random events that are happening in our Earth. Okay, mankind has affected the global climate for many, many years, the activities for many, many years. Well, why didn't we see this years ago? Why didn't we see these extremes years ago? In all seriousness, if society would just evaluate itself, everyone could agree that the morality of society right now is at an all-time low. And we have conveniences that are available to us that make practicing that immorality even easier, from the youngest of our children to the oldest. All right, so let's look at the next slide there. And this is from what we would have seen probably, 50, 60 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, and it probably looks like this in some areas. But this is the resource of land, right? And everybody needs land. We can't live. Even if you live in a tree somewhere, that tree is grounded in the land. It's grounded in the earth. Okay, and like William said, even for a person to go up and live in space or something, you've got to take resources from the earth with you. You've got to take some dirt. You've got to take some water. You've got to take some seeds. All those things come from the earth. They come from the land, and just to start something to keep going in space. All right. And they do have like little greenhouses and so forth at the International Space Station. I would suspect all their food is considered light food there. All right, that was an anti-gravity joke. Okay, land. Answers will vary, but may include metals like iron are mined from the earth, then used in industry. And William went over some of the things that are used in the industry. The gold, the platinum, the lithium, one of the other ones I couldn't pronounce that he mentioned, And then also diamonds and rubies, and there's other jewels. They use certain jewels also, I believe, in certain types of lasers and things like that. But those things are mined from the earth, then used in industry. Gold and stones like diamonds and rubies are considered valuable. The land yields vegetation for food. That's when it's, healthy and able to do its job. Clothing, shelter, and medicines. Petroleum, which is used to make lubricants and fuels, comes from the land. Everything that we have sitting before us in our environment right now, it came from the land. The plastic, no, they didn't go and harvest this from a plastic field. They don't get polyester from polyester worms. Like they get silk from silkworms. These things are either directly or byproducts from things that come from the earth. Most of it, the plastics and things like that, they are byproducts of the oil industry, the petroleum industry. Okay, even the paints that we use to coat, our beams and walls and so forth, a lot less now than what it used to be. But a lot of the polymers that are used in it, I work with resins, epoxies, and polyaspartics, and polyureas, and urethanes, and so forth. Those are a byproduct of the petroleum industry, okay? And all those things are manufactured from that, and it's used in everyday things that we probably wouldn't even consider. The lights that are above our head, of course, a lot of these things are LEDs. I don't know if they're filled with gases. Older lights, they were filled with some type of gas, to keep the oxidation down, even the incandescent lamps, and then they came out with halogen, which was a halogen gas that was in there. Xenon is another type of gas. If you've ever seen those really bright HID headlights on cars, most of the time we would know them by the lights, the overhead lights over the streets. They're very bright, a very crisp white or blue light. That's a xenon gas. Sulfide or something, sodium lights, the orange ones, the big orange ones. You see these in the streets as well. Those are filled with gases and other elements, tungsten and all these other things that all come from the earth. Now if we weren't able to get those things, we would have a lot less. Not that we would be helpless, because like William said, thousands of years before, people didn't have that. And somehow people in the 1100s managed to survive and communicate without Wi-Fi. I don't know how they did it. I just don't know how they did it. But they survived. They had lamps and they had oil. They had torches and candles and things like that. They weren't completely without, I create fire, as they make it seem like, they knew how to do things. They just didn't have the technology at that time to extract things from the earth and to use them in developing things that make life essentially just easier for us nowadays. But like it was mentioned before, you get something like with the nations being on edge and fighting and ready to, go to war at the drop of the hat, one nuclear bomb and the release of an electromagnetic pulse can wipe out all your electronic components, a great majority of them anyway, right? Transmission lines, transformers, cell phones, telephones, cameras, televisions, radios, all those things can be completely wiped out that quick, right? And will be thrust back into what they call the Stone Age, the Dark Age, right? Long as our cars are not foot pedaled anymore. Of course, I could probably use some of that stopping power to grind those calluses off my heels. But anyway, let's look at the next section there. Here are we looking at land in 2023. This is what we're seeing now with all the droughts that are taking place, and the extreme heat. Thankfully, we're starting to get a little bit of rain, but sometimes it's a little too late, and it's not always where we need it. The next slide there, number 7, we're talking about animals and insects. And so answers will vary coming from your students, but might include animals are used for food. Now, remember what we covered in the character unit, right? About animals, and not all animals are designed for food. You can't just eat anything you see. All right, and if you look at that slide there, you'll see on the left-hand side the different animals. Now, some of those animals there, well, at least one there, are would be healthy for man to eat. Okay, the rest of them probably, if you had your back turned, would eat you. Okay, William said that he wouldn't wrestle a bear. I wouldn't go to wrestle a bear either, but I wouldn't go down without a fight. Get that bear to say uncle. But I mean, go put yourself in a situation where you're going to have to be encountered by a bear or a wolf or a big boa constrictor that has been known to eat large, small deer and even a few people on a few occasions. But all those animals that you're looking right there at that page, they have a benefit, right? We might not know and understand every single benefit of those animals, but they have a purpose and they have value, right? And we should not go out of our way to just, get rid of something just because we don't like it. Oh, I shot it. Why'd you shoot it? I mean, it's just a spider, right? You'd have to really bring out a 12 gauge for a spider, right? Yeah, well, I'm scared of spiders. I don't like spiders. Okay, well, get someone to get it and put it outside. Spiders have a great benefit, okay? And most of the time, they don't typically go after and mess with humans, okay? If you look over to your right there, you see some of the other insects, butterflies and beetles and stick bugs and cicadas and even that little fly that was up here. They have a benefit. I didn't know this when I was looking up some things about animals, the wasp. How many of you have had the benefit of being stung by a wasp, right? Even sometimes just minding your own business, cutting the grass, and next thing you know, poof, man, what in the world was that? And you think, somebody's shooting darts at me, it's a wasp. But you didn't see that little nest that was up there and your say vacuum cleaner. Nobody vacuums their outside, do they? your lawnmower went by and they felt the vibration, they saw it as an attack, and they gave you a warning shot. Well, it hurt. But did you know that one of the benefits of wasp is that they have a yeast, a certain yeast in their gut, and then when they go to pollinate grapes, they actually deposit that yeast on the grape. And then when you go and pick that grape and crush the grape, or however they process it, that fermentation process is able to start and you're able to get wine, right? And that's one of the benefits of wasp that I didn't know until this day in 2023 because I educated myself about it, right? There's something that's beneficial in everything that's created, everything that's in existence with animals and insects. So it says here they're used for food, transportation, and protection. For many years, horses, mules, elephants, buffalo, oxen, things like that. They've been used in the farming, the agricultural, the transportation industry, and to some degree they still are in certain places. Then it says here scavenger animals such as pigs and crabs clean the earth. Well, they're like the waste system. They're designed to go and clean up, things that die or are sickly. If you've ever been around here in Texas, and it's not just in Texas, it's other places too, but we see a lot of them here, the vultures. You see them, circling around in the air, and then they'll come down and they'll start chomping on a piece of animal that's been hit by a car or maybe attacked by a wild animal or just died of its own. I'm glad those birds are there. They do a pretty great job too. I remember going by every day I would go by and there was this sow, this pig, that was hit and he was knocked off the side of the road. And I remember seeing him, and then every once in a while his legs would spread out a little bit farther because he was getting bloated, and then he was not bloated anymore. And then you see the vultures just coming there and picking off of him, and then next thing you know, you see white ribs just sticking out of the dirt, because it's not just the vultures, it's the insects too. The insects are coming in and they're scavenging and they're breaking all this down, right, so that you don't have to deal with it, okay? And if you've ever broken down and got out of the side of the road and there's a dead, pig laying there, immediately, there's a carcass of a pig because that air is bringing those wonderful fragrances right to your nose, and you want to kind of get out of there pretty quick. But they're beneficial. right? If they weren't there, it's like when they had the strike in New York City some time ago, the sanitation workers strike. Well, people were still throwing trash out of, in the street and on the curb, but there was nobody coming there to pick it up. That's what it would be like if these animals, these insects that are also scavengers in both the animal and insect kingdom, weren't around to do their jobs. And we have a lot less of the various species of animals and insects today than we had 100 or even 1,000 years ago. Okay, they've been made extinct to some degree to mankind's activities. Okay, they would not take the choice to just extinct themselves. It's things that we have done that have negatively impacted our environment around us. Then look at the next one there, oceans and seas. And you see here, answers will vary, but it might include provide food, sodium chloride, which is table salt. And I remember watching a documentary a long time ago on, I think it was right around the time when, I don't know if it was before or after India and Pakistan, was that? Yeah, kind of had their separation. And one of the things that they were fighting for was their rights to make salt, because that was a big part of their industry there. And they drew off of the ocean, and they had like just kind of raised beds that they drew the water in, and then they let the water evaporate, and what was left behind was the sea salt. And they would take it and they would sift it and they would get it in piles, and then people would take it and they'd take it into the markets and they would sell it. Right? And that's how people made their living. Well, people were starting to encroach on that because salt is a very valuable commodity. In fact, the word salary comes from salt. Phrases like worth their weight in salt, that showed the importance of it because it was used in everything, from cooking to healing to wounds and things like that, to stopping infections, to, killing off certain, even as a pesticide. And so, that you wouldn't think that from the ocean, but yeah, sodium chloride or table salt actually comes from the ocean. Now, there's also in Ohio, under the Great Lakes, at least under Lake Erie, I'm not sure about the other 4 lakes, there is a huge salt mines underneath Lake Erie. Okay, huge. I mean, enormous. If you've ever seen these big salt mine trucks, and there's a few times we've seen them driving on the road. They're just enormous. I think the tires on the things are like 10 feet tall. This is just the tires, and they were big dump trucks, and they would just mine just huge amounts of salt, and they're still doing it to this day from underneath the lake, which obviously there must have been water there to be at some point to begin with, or it was created. I'm not sure. But anyway, sodium chloride, vegetation such as seaweed, which is ground into powder and used in other foods as well. And then, don't forget the sea life, the healthy sea life that are also there in the ocean. And then you look at the right-hand side there of that oceans and seas. What did I do there? That's not an ocean and sea. That's plants and trees. I apologize. I had my mind on one thing and my picture's on another thing. But that should have been plants and trees. So if you could look at that slide there, that's still giving you 2 types of things: the plants on the left-hand side and the trees on the right-hand side. I wonder why you guys looking at me funny. It says plants and trees. It says answers will vary, but include grains and other plants are used for food and clothing, as in the case of cotton. Herbs are used for medicine and seasoning food. Trees are used for building homes and the production of paper. Now I'm going to test your biology knowledge here and see if you remember from school. I think it was biology, maybe it was science. What are the 2 types of trees that are in existence? The 2 classifications of trees. 2 of them. I gotta cue the Jeopardy music. Okay, I'll give it to you. Evergreen or coniferous and deciduous. Coniferous, which are typically your evergreen trees, right? And they also take kind of a conical shape, which you see in your pines, your spruces. They also have pine or needle-like scales as what they call leaves. And those are considered your coniferous trees. Evergreens fall in that classification as well. And then your deciduous trees are the types of trees that typically lose their leaves every year, right? Evergreen trees, they don't lose their spines. I mean, they're pines, they're pine cones, and so forth. They do drop them, but I mean they're green all year round. Okay, so those are the two types of trees there are. I know you didn't expect the test. I couldn't help it. Had to give it to you. Let's. I got that out of order there. I'll just read this to you. This was from this was supposed to be. I didn't put it in the right place. I apologize. This was supposed to be for the oceans and seas. And generally speaking here, the difference between an ocean and a sea, because I used to wonder, well, what's the difference between an ocean and a sea? And sometimes those words are kind of used interchangeably, because when you think of something like the Caribbean Sea is also a part of the Atlantic Ocean, right? But it says the most general sense of the words ocean and sea are often used interchangeably to refer to the big body of salt water that covers most of Earth. But technically speaking, an ocean is one of the big 5 or 7 divisions of this expanse, like the Atlantic and the Pacific. While a sea is a smaller portion of this, like the Mediterranean or the Caribbean. Typically, one that is bounded, speaking of seas, one that is bounded in some way by smaller land masses. Now, it could be on, 3 sides or 2 sides and so forth, but that is part of what makes up a sea. Lakes, now, it's not included in there, but that's another water resource here, are smaller than seas. Lakes can be natural or man-made and are primarily freshwater, and lakes don't have a direct outlet to the ocean as opposed to seas. Seas have a direct outlet to the ocean. Lakes usually have to go through streams and rivers and so forth, and eventually they do pour out into the ocean. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and that's something that you can, in fact, you might have some of your students ask that question, well, what's the difference? What's the difference between an ocean and a sea, right? Or, if you're up north, what's the difference between a sea and a lake? And most of the difference there is, lakes are surrounded all around, and lakes typically are freshwater. Now there are some salt lakes around there, but normally they call them seas. All right. Now, if you look at the next slide here, I'm going to test your knowledge again. All right. This is about lakes. These are freshwater lakes, and I went and looked up. I knew, but I wanted to verify what are the largest freshwater lakes on the planet. All right. Now, the one on the left, some of you might be familiar with. Anybody? It's not Inferior. It's Superior. Lake Superior. Okay. It's a part of the 5 Great Lakes. The 5 Great Lakes are what they call the Finger Lakes in the northern part of the United States. The one on the right there is Lake Victoria, and that's in Africa, and it's a part of the Great Lakes system. There's a system of Great Lakes in Africa. Now, Lake Superior is the largest, and it's a part of the largest freshwater system in the world called the 5 Great Lakes. Now, let me test mine. Lake Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, Ontario. There we go. That was 5 of them, right? Okay, and so these are freshwater systems. One of the clearest lakes that I believe is, I think it's called Lake Baikal, and it's somewhere in Russia or Siberia or something like that. But that lake is so clear when that thing freezes. Now, you know how sometimes water freezes, it gets like a hazy, whitish look to it if you ever pulled your ice cubes out, unless you've got a really, really great filtering system. That water freezes so clear you can see like 30 feet down in it. You can see bubbles suspended mid-freeze, in the water. It's an absolutely beautiful lake, and it is I think they say a fifth or something like that of the world's fresh water is in that lake, and it's really cold, But if you get an opportunity, go check it out, online, look it up. Those things are available for you to see as resources there. And if you look at the very last one there, the next slide, it is sunlight. Now, I chose this picture to kind of help with cool thoughts, as hot as it is right now. I don't know how many of you like snow. I do in looking at it in the picture. But but you see in the very background there, the focus is on the sunlight. All right, and we don't think about how beneficial sunlight is, but it is extremely beneficial. In fact, in the upper portions of the hemisphere, where they get only so many months of like sunlight, and then so many months of like the dusk and dawn or whatever, they have what's called SAD, which is seasonal affective disorder. Now it's not only there; it's a little bit farther south too, in areas where wintertime is experienced more and there's not that much sunlight, right? Where it's mostly cloudy. It's called seasonal affective disorder. And scientists have found that it's a result of a lack of sunlight. Okay, and so during those times of the winter months, they'll encourage people to increase their uptake of things like vitamin D. Okay, because you don't get vitamin D from the sun, but your body converts the sunlight that hits your skin into vitamin D. And it's one of the healthiest, cleanest sources of vitamin D that you can get. And so I do try to get out there and get as much sunlight as I possibly can. That way I'm not looking like a vampire, be all pale and everything. But vitamin D is extremely healthy for us, and it's produced actually in the intestines, right? And that's how deep that sunlight goes in to our bodies. Even the deepest parts of the ocean that is pitch black and extremely cold receives benefits from the sunlight. The plants that are down there receive benefits. The fish, the sea life down there, even the deeper parts of the soil receive benefits from the sunlight in some way, shape, or form. And so answers here would be it's essential to life and health. It provides vitamin D, promotes the growth of all vegetation, and elevates your mood and provides heat and light. Yes, the sunlight does elevate your mood. I remember being in Ohio and being in the winter time, and you'd have a month and a half, and of course when it's winter in Ohio, it's just winter in Ohio. That's just it. Don't expect to see any skies or grass or sunlight until like late April, early May, right? But when you would get a day where it would stop snowing and the clouds would actually open up and the sunlight would start pouring in and the snow would start melting on the asphalt streets, man, you'd see people out there at the car wash. People are out jogging, with shorts on. I'm thinking it's still 35 degrees out here, sir. But it lifts the mood of people. The sun it makes you feel great, and it makes you feel warm and everything. Now I know we've been dealing with it, pretty intense for 3 or 4 months now. But it's still extremely beneficial. Even in the winter time, and you have a winter day here in Texas, it's like when we get snow here in Texas, it's like, okay, just hold on. Okay, it's gone, right? Because the sun comes out and it just melts it right away. But it promotes the growth of vitamin D in your body, or it provides, vitamin D, and promotes the growth of all vegetation, and it elevates your mood. And that's one of the reasons why the leaves fall off the trees and the grass browns in the wintertime, because isn't there still sunlight out in the wintertime? Yes, but there's less of it, right? The days get shorter. So there's less sunlight, so those things go into a dormant state during the winter months. Now, let's see here. So that gets us kind of caught up to where we are right now on 177. So we'll get a little bit into this on page 177, which is going to... Now, all of these aren't broken down. I think like the first 4 are broken down in the next few pages, and then they're kind of summed up in the last one. The last 4 points are summed up in detail as we move forward in this lesson. But it says, let's take a closer look at our valuable resources. One way you can respect the environment is to educate yourself about the Earth's many resources and their benefits. Now, like I said before, I didn't know that about wasp. Now wasp, they are a resource. They're not something I'm going to go out and get, But if I had a vineyard, knowing that information, I probably would want wasp around, right? I probably would want wasp that would help to increase the production and the yield of my grapes, since they help provide that yeast factor that's actually in their gut, right? It's in their gut, just like honey is the digested sugars and pollens and so forth and regurgitated from the bees. That's about the only vomit I feel safe eating, right? It's coming straight from a bee. Well, not straight from a bee, but coming from a bee, because it's extremely valuable, extremely healthy. They've archaeologists have opened up honey from thousands of years ago that was buried with some of these noble people, and it was still very beneficial. It doesn't deteriorate, it doesn't spoil, it doesn't get bad. They've even discovered that honey is so powerful it can actually suck water out of glass or out of a rock. It can stop most infections in their place, if provided it's the right honey. Now, not everything that says honey is honey. Like William was talking about the gold, not everything that glitters is gold. You have to be very careful and educate yourself, because they might get away with putting a little bit of honey in this big jar, but the rest is sugar and water and other things. So our air here is what we're going to get into. It says, did you know that without air there will be no life on Earth? Air is a mixture of gases that make up the atmosphere, and I think one of the old English or Latin words for it was firmament, and you see it in a lot of older texts. It says it makes up the atmosphere surrounding the Earth. Air is composed of oxygen, carbon dioxide, argon, nitrogen, and trace elements. And we're going to see how some of those trace elements have actually increased, over the last 20, 30, maybe even 100 years. And science are doing, I forget what they call it. I have it written down, but it's another discipline of biology, but it has to particularly do with the air, not necessarily the atmosphere, but the air itself in our troposphere and so forth. But it says here, all living things, including ocean life, need air to stay alive. And we've seen that this summer with the extreme heat, where bodies of water in certain areas of the ocean, some of the life, the plant life, and even some of the fish, they've started to die off, because some of that extreme heat, it reduces the amount of oxygen in the water, right? And so the plant life that breathes oxygen, it draws it from the air. Fish, they are able to extract that through their gills. They're not getting enough oxygen, so it's pretty much like they're being in a vacuum, and they can't breathe, okay? And so they're affected, and they're negatively impacted by this as well. Let's look at that little diagram there. Underneath there, it says, well, it's just kind of the breakdown of the different elements in the air. And when we get to the next class, we're going to see some of the things that are being found in the air that, I don't know, they're there. But some people will say, I would rather not know that they were there, but that doesn't change the fact that they still affect us. Now, lastly, it says, if you were to isolate each of these gases and breathe them in their pure forms, they would harm you. Argon, I believe they use that in welding, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not a welder. Any welders out there know? Do you use argon for anything like that? I don't know if you use it for that. They might use it for something else. Nitrogen, I know they use that to displace oxygen in certain things. They nitrogen pack things and so forth. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of our exhalation of air and so forth. And oxygen, they use that in torches, I know that, and oxygen acetylene for cutting torches and so forth. But oxygen in itself is an extremely flammable gas, right? That's like if you were to separate the two components of water, the hydrogen and the oxygen, and just take a deep breath of any one of those components, you probably, I know at least oxygen, you would burn yourself, on the inside. Oxygen is very powerful, so it has to be diluted and reduced to a certain percentage mixed with other things. So it says, if you were to isolate each of these gases and breathe them in their pure forms, they would harm you. It takes just the right combination to produce air in a healthy form to sustain life. And I'm thankful that it is that way because of that, we're able to breathe and to enjoy life and just to experience the great benefits that life has to offer. So we're going to stop right there, and we'll actually pick up there on page 177 and continue a little bit more in that. Our next class is going to be this upcoming Wednesday, which will be the 13th at 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you at the very next class. Everyone have a wonderful evening.